We are representing Dr. Melissa Landa, who was a professor at the University of Maryland for 10 years until she was dismissed in 2018 because of her pro-Israel views and her Jewish faith. Dr. Landa is joining us now, as well as Mark Goldfeder, a senior counsel with the ACLJ.
So, Dr. Landa, welcome to the broadcast, and we're honored to represent you. But I think it's important for our audience around the country and, frankly, around the world that listen to this broadcast to understand what exactly happened at the University of Maryland, where you were a professor for 10 years.
That's right. I formed an alumni organization at my alma mater, Oberlin College, when I discovered that there was a virulent anti-Semitic professor there named Joy Carrega. And I began to appear in the press representing this alumni group. And essentially, we were calling for her dismissal. And once that began to happen, I began to experience a hostile work environment at the University of Maryland. My superiors began to pull away from me. My associate chair, with whom I was supposed to be delivering a paper at a conference, canceled and said he would not deliver the paper with me. When I went to Israel for Passover, I was reprimanded and told that I was out of bounds from university policy and I needed to come back.
And I understand on that particular thing, Dr. Landa, that on the trip to Israel, you actually had authorization from the university to go.
Yes, I had authorization and I was covering my classes. I was following university protocol. I was not in any way out of bounds.
I mean, could you imagine for a moment, I don't want to interrupt you, but could you imagine for a moment if it was a Muslim professor going to one of the holy sites within Islam with the class approval of the university's approval, and you're still covering your classes? They would have done nothing. Okay, I just want to make that point because of the double standard here, but continue. So you covered your classes, you come back, what happens?
Right. I came back early. My Passover was ruined. I spent the first few days in Israel not spending time with family, sitting on Skype, teaching my classes. And on the first night of Passover, I received this hostile email from my superior telling me that I was basically at risk of losing my job. I came back almost immediately. And
did
things
he actually
just went from
Did he
bad
actually
to
say,
worse.
Dr. Landa, did he say something did the supervisor say something to the effect, I did not realize Passover was that long because it's a week-long holiday?
No, she did not say that. She said this is quite out of bounds of university policy. I can't remember the exact words, but there was an implicit, there was
approval
a threat.
To go. I mean, the thing is, you had approval to go, right?
I absolutely had approval to go. I was in a state of shock. I couldn't quite believe it. And she did not respond to my attempts to reach her. And things just went from bad to worse. And the next thing that happened was I tried to establish a partnership with the Levinsky College of Education in Tel Aviv to do some research. And I was immediately removed from the course that I needed in order to fulfill that research. This was a course that I had been teaching for 10 years that I had helped to create. Right. And days after I informed them of this partnership that I was trying to create, I was removed from the course. So there was a sequence of events that happened. I would take one action that related to my Jewish identity and my Zionist identity, and I was then punished. And this went on for over a year.
Okay, so Mark, we've got a clear case here of retaliation for being anti-BDS, for taking the and also protecting fighting against anti-Semitism. So let's talk about the legal process that ensued here.
Sure. And just to give a little context, Dr. Landa is very modest, but she was an award-winning professor, extremely popular, had no problems until she started expressing her Jewish faith more openly. And, essentially when that happened and her supervisors started to withdraw from her, Dr. Landa experienced this as the religious discrimination that it was, and she eventually reported the religious discrimination to the college diversity officer. When she came back from that Passover trip, Jay, this is what you were referring to. That's when she met with the supervisor in person, and the supervisor admitted that she had granted Dr. Landa permission for the trip and said she never should have, and she had never realized that Passover is so long. And in that same meeting, the supervisors also accused Dr. Landa of somehow using her with her religion. And so that's when it really, really crossed the line. And that's when Dr. Landa filed her first religious discrimination complaint to the college diversity officer.
Okay. And the college diversity officer, eventually the ombudsman said, get this resolved, correct, Mark?
Yeah, after 3 complaints, the university ombudsman said to the supervisor, listen, that you have to have some kind of a compromise role for her in order to let her continue here. And, she's done good work. And, with in direct contradiction to that suggestion by the ombudsman, Dr. Landa was fired.
All right, so to put this all in context then, we filed a federal lawsuit. I wish I could tell you that this is a unique situation and it never happens. And we'll hear more from Dr. Land in a moment. But Harry, this is happening a lot.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that this exclusionary history, as practiced by the University of Maryland, goes back at least 100 years. And so we have politically correct individuals who deny the Jewish right to Israel and basically to practice their own faith. We live in a world wherein university officials have mastered the art of speaking out of both sides of their mouths simultaneously. On one hand, they proclaim their devotion to diversity and inclusion. But on the other hand, they support the exclusion of certain views, particularly pro-Israel views, which are deemed offensive. On one hand, they proclaim allegiance to freedom of speech, and on the other hand, they deem certain speech offensive because it allegedly advances apartheid or because it's religious. So what we live in is a globe that is unbalanced, particularly with respect to the nation-state of Israel.
So, Dr. Landa, you're trying to work through this, and obviously you've been there 10 years. Mark said, and I have no doubt, you're an award-winning professor. You're facing this kind of discrimination. Were you surprised at the response of the University of Maryland during all of this?
Yeah, I felt like I was living through a slow death of my career. I felt that, wherever I turned, I was having doors slammed in my face. I felt that I was being targeted. I felt that I was being treated for who I was, not for what I had done. I felt that I was being judged not for my work performance, but for my identity as a Jewish Zionist. And I felt that there was nothing that I could do. I felt completely helpless because no matter who I turned to as I climbed up the ladder of, authority, I was either ignored, I was dismissed, or I was reprimanded.
Andy, we filed a federal lawsuit here seeking both injunctive damages and basically reinstatement.
Right. We want a reinstatement for the professor, who I understand is now teaching at an elementary school, which I think is a disgrace. Here is a university professor reduced to teaching in an elementary school. Not that that's a bad thing. I don't mean to say that elementary teaching is bad. My wife was an elementary teacher, but I'm saying that she should be back in her rightful position in the university. We're seeking exemplary, that is punitive damages to punish the university for this conduct and associated costs, including the fees and so forth that were necessary to bring the lawsuit. So in other words, punish the university for this anti-Jewish conduct, this anti-Israeli conduct, this anti-Zionist conduct, punish them for that and give her back the position that she had as a university professor.
And what's interesting here is that, remember, this all began because the professor, Dr. Landa, who was joining us on the air, a client, decided to speak out because of her alma mater. It wasn't something at University of Maryland. It was because her alma mater, which is known for being an extreme left university now, Oberlin, but also hosting these professors who are anti-Semites. Again, not just anti-Israel, but anti-Semites. So she speaks out, uses her free speech rights, not about the University of Maryland, but about another university, and it begins this avalanche against her, where, as Andy said, her career is, as she watched it, was being killed in front of her. We're fighting to do something about that. And we've got the federal government on the side, really. Yeah,
EEOC came out and said this case should be resolved, and it should be resolved with an accommodation, and they wouldn't do it. And that's why we're in federal court. We're going to talk more about this. It's happening on other university campuses. But the ACLJ front and center, first lawsuit of 2020. 22 filed on January 4th.